Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here for another one of the Expert Journal's Expert Mind Talks. I am thrilled that you've chosen to join us today. It's been a while since I've been here, and I have to tell you, it's great to be back. I know that so many people have struggled with COVID over the past couple years, and it finally got hold of me, and I needed to take care of myself. So Minds Journal, everybody on the team has been so supportive and inviting me back to do another conversation or have another conversation with y'all today. So what we're going to be talking about today is forgiveness. And for most people, this is kind of a tough thing to do. And I think that a lot of it has to do with our understanding of it. And because of that, I thought it'd be great to talk about what exactly forgiveness is and how we can actually do it effectively. So let's start off with a real quick definition of forgiveness. And I like this one because it's simple and really direct. So forgiveness is to consciously decide to release your feelings of resentment, hurt, anger, or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you. And I'd like for you to keep in mind that this definition doesn't define who the person is, which leaves it open to that person who has harmed you could even be yourself. Now, what I really, really like about this definition is that it's all about you, right? And I don't mean you, specifically, but the individual, right? So it's about me too when I have to deal with forgiveness. And I think that simple fact brings us to the reason so many struggle with forgiveness. So what I mean by that is I think that there are a lot of folks who mistakenly think that forgiveness has to do with the other person, that the other person or group needs to apologize or make amends or do something else before we can forgive them. But the truth is that the resentment, hurt, anger, and vengeance toward another is yours, right? And it only causes you the pain because you're the one replaying the harm you experienced again and again. You're holding on to it and in a way nurturing it so that it never has a chance to dissipate. And again, you is not you specifically, it's any of us. This is what we do as human beings, is we tend to hold on to the things that hurt us. And this makes so much sense from an evolutionary perspective. Because back in the days when humans were living in caves, we really needed to know who we could trust, right? We needed to know that because our lives depended on it, literally, right? However, today, we don't necessarily need to keep all the harms done to us so much in our consciousness. We can more safely let them go without necessarily fearing for our lives anymore. And I think another reason that so many of us struggle with forgiveness is that we mistakenly believe that to forgive means to forget and act as if the harm never happened. So because of that, I want to just go ahead and repeat the definition of forgiveness again, because I'd like you to listen very, very carefully to it again. Sometimes you hear it differently, when you hear things second and third time. So forgiveness is to consciously decide to release your feelings of resentment, hurt, anger, or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you. And I'd like for you to keep in mind that the person who has harmed you could even be you. Now, if you listen carefully, you heard that nowhere at all in this definition do I mention forgetting the act. In fact, remembering the act that caused you the pain and learning how you can prevent or avoid it in some way to keep yourself from ever being hurt in the same way again in the future is exactly what you should be learning from the situation. So forgiveness is not about forgetting, condoning. It's more about accepting that the hurt has happened and choosing what you're going to learn from it so that you can keep yourself whole and healthy. So another question that I often hear about forgiveness is it easier to forgive someone else than it is to forgive yourself? And for most people, honestly, yeah, it is. It's easier to forgive someone else than it is to forgive yourself. And I believe that there are three primary reasons for this. The first one is that it's easier to see how someone else or some other group has harmed us. And it can also be easier to feel like a victim than it is to recognize how we may have caused ourselves or someone else harm. The second reason is that it can also be difficult to forgive ourselves because it takes effort, and sometimes it seems easier to wallow in guilt and regret. Now, I don't mean that people are actually consciously choosing it. It's just that the effort seems to be so much, and that somehow it's safer and easier to feel the pain. And then the third reason is that we can hold ourselves to a higher level and breadth of accountability than we do others. Now, I just shared a whole bunch of stuff about what forgiveness is, why it came about, right, as something that we need to do, and why it's so hard sometimes for us to actually do it. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about forgiveness before I dive into some tips for how you can actually reach forgiveness. So if you want to just jot your questions down in the comments, I will be happy to answer them. I'm going to pause here for a couple seconds, right, so y'all can start typing. I always feel when I pause that I should have music playing in the background or something so it's not just silent. Hopefully my dogs don't hear me say that and start barking to help fill in the silence. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anything come up in the comments with questions, so let me dive right into tips for reaching forgiveness. So, we've kind of explored a bit of what forgiveness is and what it isn't, why we struggle with it in general, and why it can be so difficult for us to forgive ourselves. So let's go ahead and really talk about brass tacks. What can you do? Because, I love to help folks get into action and move forward. So to forgive someone else. Sometimes you just need to get away from the event, gain some distance, right? In time, in perspective, so that it feels okay to be able to forgive. So you can actually make the conscious decision to say, I'm done feeling so bad about this, and I'm ready to move on from it. The second tip is to be willing to do your part. And remember, that has to do with the choice. You need to make the choice to forgive and to let things go. You need to choose to let go of the anger and the hurt. And in order to do that, it may require you to have some compassion or empathy toward the other person. I know when I was doing a lot of work around forgiveness several years ago, it was really hard for me at times to feel anything than just anger toward the person that had hurt me. Thinking, They should know better. I know they know better. Why did they do this, right? All those kind of thoughts, that can go spiraling into your head around and around and around. And what I finally realized for me was that they were doing the best they could in the moment. Was it the best for me? No. Do I ever want to be put in that position again? No. But the longer I dwelled on it, the longer I was holding on to the hurt and keeping myself from being able to move forward. I have some other tips here, but I see that we have a couple of questions in the chat. So Kurt writes, sometimes it's really hard to forgive someone who's done unspeakable things. Can we really forgive them, and should we? This is my personal opinion, Kurt. I do believe that even when someone's done unspeakable things, unless you want to continue to replaying those in your mind and feel defined by them, then yes, I think you can forgive them. Does it mean that it's easy? No. Does it mean that it will come quickly? No, it doesn't. What forgiveness really means in a case like this is that you are choosing not to be defined by those actions that you were on the receiving end of, right? The unspeakable things. It doesn't define who you are. It doesn't trap you anymore. You are willing to let it go and truly be yourself. And I know it's a bunch of words. I hope you can feel that there's a lot of love I'm trying to share while I'm saying these words, because it's not okay to be on the receiving end of unspeakable things. It's not. And yet, if you are, it's just a fact. And how you can choose to respond to that fact will really kind of dictate how you're willing to live your life going forward. And that's why forgiveness is so important. It's about you and your life, and you being strong enough to live your life and not being stuck in the heinous things that may have happened. I'm sorry, the heinous things that did happen. I hope that helps. Ooh, I need a break after that one. That was really big and heavy. Okay, let me take a quick breath here. Melody has a question here. Or I'm sorry, maybe it's a comment. It says, she writes, a very knowledgeable and truthful message. In forgiveness, we let go of all the anger and emotions that fuel fire to self-destruction. In forgiveness, we are embracing to grow in self, understanding that crap happens because it does. Sorry, that was my aside. It wasn't right. But now we learn what we will and won't tolerate, part of our journey in life. Melody, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. So Melody has a couple other lovely comments. She was cheering me on before with exactly I'm imagining, and then she writes, amen, thank you for this powerful message. Thank you for being here, Melody and Kurt, and being brave enough to post. I really appreciate that. Oh, Kurt, thank you. I'm glad you felt. I'm glad you felt that it was helpful. I appreciate you letting me know. And I appreciate you being here every time I'm online. I really do. You always have great questions and comments that you add. So I'm really feeling heart-centered today. Can you tell I keep holding my hands up by my heart? So thank you again for this opportunity, for being here, everyone. So we're going to go back to the tips for reaching forgiveness. We covered the first two. gaining some distance in time and perspective from the event, being willing to do your part, were the first two that we covered. The third one is to work through your feelings. Now, a couple ways come to mind immediately when I say this. For me, I don't know if they do for you, but they do for me. Journaling, we've talked about journaling before, I believe, where journaling needs to have a purpose. It's not just about spewing things onto a page. It's really about directing a purging of the emotions and moving forward with them instead of staying stuck in them and just continuing to stir them up. Another thing that you can do to work through your feelings is talk about them. You can talk about them with a helping professional, a therapist, would be great. You talk with them about trusted family and friends, right, who really are willing to support you and keep you from getting stuck and spiraling in the hurt, the anger, the resentment. So those are two really straightforward ways about how you can work through your feelings. Number 4 is to find the silver lining of the hurt. And Melody kind of touched on this earlier in her comment. But when you have something that causes you great anguish happen to you, right? It gives you an opportunity to grow and to become more than you were before. It also allows you perhaps to recognize that a relationship wasn't what you thought it was. So you can make different choices about how to be or not to be in that relationship. So if you can always look for something that you can take away from the experience that allows you to move forward in some way, that can be your silver lining. Okay, and after you've done all of that, then you can actually start practicing forgiveness. And one thing that people find to be helpful is kind of think about forgiveness as being a muscle, right? So, when you start, I don't know, I've lifted weights in my day, right? And you always start with lighter weights and then you work up to heavier weights. And that's how you grow your muscles. So if you think of forgiveness as a muscle like that, you start forgiving smaller things first. And then you start building up your capacity to practice forgiveness, to practice not letting the inevitable hurts of our lives keep you from being who you truly are. You can also then forgive yourself for your part in the situation. And being able to do that requires self-compassion, which may be a new skill, right? Because I know that was a skill I certainly had to develop. But when you can forgive yourself for your part in the situation, then it becomes easier to forgive the wrongdoer or wrongdoers. Now, this works great, right, when it's somebody else that you're trying to forgive. We have to add in a few other things when you're just trying to forgive yourself. But for forgiving someone else, this is a great, great pathway forward. Then after you've actually reached the point of forgiveness for the wrongdoer or wrongdoers, then you have another decision to make. So you've already decided to forgive, but then you can decide whether or not it's worth communicating your forgiveness to the person or group that caused you the hurt. If it is, then you might choose to write a letter or have a discussion. If it is, and the person or group isn't reachable, right, you could talk about your forgiveness and what it's given you with someone else. And if it's not worth communicating, then just allowing yourself to actively experience the release of the hurt is really important. It's how you'll know you've truly forgiven and moved on. I also see that there are a few more comments, so I'm going to pause here and address the questions and comments before I get into how to forgive yourself. Okay, so the first one I see up here is just from someone anonymous Facebook user. How to forgive someone who is not even sorry. And their comment is, it's not even worth it. Here's the thing. You or an individual being able to forgive someone else is not at all dependent on the other person. Forgiveness is about you, right? When I forgive somebody, it's about me, right? It's about me making the choice that I don't want to let what happened continue to hurt me or diminish me in any way at all. It's not worth my life to spend it regretting what somebody else did to me. It's important that I take my life and I live it in the best way I know how, and without the constraints of what someone else has done or some other group has done. I hope that helps. I truly believe that forgiveness is incredibly important and that it's always worth it as you're able to make the choice to do it. Melody chimes in again with another comment. She says, yes, okay, so this is in response to the Facebook user. I verbally forgave an abusive husband and the horrific acts. I empathize with all of this. It's so true to forgive. So many people wanted me to be angry, and it doesn't help. Yeah. You know, anger is very natural when you've been hurt, right? Because it allows us a way to put kind of a barrier up on the hurt and the scared that's deep inside underneath it, right? So anger is a tool to help protect us, right? And in the moment of someone who is being, threatening our lives, right? It makes sense, right, to have fear. It makes sense to try to figure out how to protect yourself as that's happening, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on psychologically when things like that happen, that really a therapist is the best person to talk about what's happening with all of that, on an individual basis. But when you are able to separate from the person who has been doing the hurting so that you recognize who you are and what your part was in allowing the hurt to happen, then it becomes much easier to let go of the anger. It becomes much easier to have compassion for yourself, to want yourself to be whole again, to want yourself to be able to move forward again, to want yourself to be able to live your life fully again. And that's a gift you're giving to yourself, right? It's not anything at all to do with the other person. Forgiveness is about you, and that's all it is. And Melody has an addendum here. She says, I forgot to add that I did divorce the fool, but the experience made me stronger. Well, thank goodness you divorced him, Melanie. I'm very, very happy to know that. Because yes, so what you learned, right, thank you so much for your vulnerability and sharing that this was your experience, because I think a lot of people will be able to understand about forgiveness even more with your beautiful example that you're sharing. So after being in an abusive situation, it can take a lot of guts and courage to say, I'm done, right? But Melody did that because she said it wasn't worth spending my life in this situation. So she got out. She got out, and I'm going to guess that you're happier for it, Melody. So Thank you. Thank you again for your vulnerability and sharing that. Oh, and then she has one more comment here. That is an important key. Forgiving ourselves is really important. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And thank you for pointing that out again, Melody. I believe that's the last comment I see here. So that is a great segue into how to forgive yourself, okay? When you are the one who has caused wrong, right? Or if I have caused wrong, the first thing to do is to go through the first list of tips that I gave, right? So let me repeat them now so they're fresh in everybody's mind. Gain distance from the event. That could be time and or perspective. Be willing to do your part to let go of the anger, right? So you're prepping for the choice, right? Work through your feelings about it. Find the silver lining in the hurt. And if you're the one who has done something that's hurtful to yourself or someone else, right? The first thing to do is to recognize that it's an opportunity for growth. Then forgive was what I had said before for when you're forgiving somebody else, right? So it's not necessarily that you're at the forgiveness stage yet, but you can start forgiving yourself for smaller things to get into the practice and build up your capacity for other forgiveness. Then, once you're to the place where you're ready to forgive, you can apologize. And a heartfelt apology where you actually recognize what it is that you had done that caused so much pain, and empathizing with the person that you may have hurt about what you imagine it caused them, and let them know how deeply sorry you are for it. If, however, the person that you need to forgive for harming you is you, right, then the apology is still important. It's not a matter of just intellectualizing it away. You may actually feel better if you speak it. You may actually feel better if you look yourself in the mirror to speak it so you can look into your own eyes, right? It may feel good to write yourself a letter or a note. And I actually mean putting pen or pencil or crayon or marker or whatever it is to paper or a whiteboard, whatever it is that you need to do so that you can express the apology in a way that is external to just the thoughts running around in your head. The other thing that's important that I touched on earlier was that you need to also recognize if you're holding yourself to a higher level or breadth of accountability than you do others. Because if that's the case, that's another opportunity for growth and forgiveness. It's one thing to expect yourself to behave in a certain way, right? And it's one thing to let other folks slide on things that you would never let yourself do, right? But there has to be some kind of recognition and accountability that's appropriate, right? So I'm just going to throw myself back into, college days, right? I expected myself to perform at a certain level. It had nothing to do with anybody else, but I expected myself to perform at a certain level. And if I didn't, I was not very kind to myself. I actually would out loud call myself names, right? That wasn't helpful for anybody. And it took me years to be able to understand that the names I called myself were really, really hurtful, and that I needed to grow from that and apologize and forgive myself for doing it so that I could move forward. And that kind of leads me into the next tip for forgiving yourself is to release your negative thoughts. So This is where we get caught up in our heads, right? You know how when you do something wrong, you go over it and over it and over it and over it and over it. Those are the negative thoughts I'm talking about. And so even after you forgive yourself, sometimes those thoughts will pop back in. Well, yeah, but. And then you can go through the process of saying, I have forgiven myself. I have learned this and I have made this change. So I'm growing, and those things that happened in the past are in the past and can't be changed, right? So I'm using that experience to move forward. And with that, I see there are more comments. Looks like Christine has a question. Should I need to forgive someone who constantly abuses me? It sickens me to the core. How can I move forward from this? Okay. So if someone is constantly abusing you, Christine, that's not a person you need in your life, right? So yes, forgiveness is important. And it's not necessarily something that you're going to be able to do in the moment, right? Remember I was talking about gaining a little bit of distance from the event, right? So you need to physically separate from this person, right, who's abusing you, or don't call them anymore, or don't accept their calls, or however the abuse is happening, right? So that you can gain a break, you can get a break from the abuse, and then you can gain some perspective as to what's going on. Then when you're ready, you can choose to let go of the sickness that it brings up in you when it happens. Because you write that it sickens me to my core, right? When you're ready to let that go, because it's holding you back, not because of anything about the other person, but because it's holding you back, right? Then you'll be in a better place to be able to forgive. Right? And then Melody chimes in, forgive and cut the cord. Yep. I think that cutting the cord might be good to start with, right? But if you can forgive first and cut the cord then, perfect. I love it, right? And Melody's been through this. So she knows what she's talking about. She knows what she did. Yeah, and then she follows up with, we only allow what we accept. Yeah, that's very, very true. And that goes with how we allow others to treat us as well as how we treat ourselves. It's very humbling to be a human being, right? Because we're always learning. We're never perfect, right? We're always taking in more information and making different choices about who we want to be and how we want to be in the world. Forgiveness in and of itself can allow each of us to free up more of the energy that we've been spending feeling the hurt, feeling the anger, building the resentment. Whereas when we can start to be more active about resolving the situation so that we actually can get to the point of releasing all of the stuff that's holding us back, then we're actually able to grow and to be more of who we were truly meant to be. Well, y'all, that's the summation of all of my notes that I've put together for our conversation today. I'd love it if you have any more questions or concerns, if you'd like to share them in the chat. I'd be more than happy to address them. Oh, and I miss Samira. Samira sent a bunch of on fire. So I'm taking that as a good thing. Any other comments or questions anyone would like to share? Again, I'm feeling the need to do a little song and dance, which I know won't be helpful or I'd have to forgive myself for doing it too, honestly, because I am um, not a very good singer. My voice wobbles too much and notes mean nothing to it. Oh, thank you, Melody. I'm guessing you're saying thank you for me not singing and dancing. Thank you all so much. I truly appreciate all of your participation, your vulnerability in sharing what you've been going through, what you're thinking about with respect to forgiveness. And if you do have another question, I'll hang out here for a little bit longer, but I don't want to keep you all here unnecessarily. All right, y'all. I appreciate you each so very much. Thank you for spending the time with me today on the Expert Mind Talks brought to you by the Minds Journal. And I wish you all a glorious day and joy in learning how forgiveness can allow you to be more of who you truly are. Bye-bye, everyone.